Hi, and welcome back to another fabulous episode of I'm Free Now What? Now, my name is Michelle Fortier. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who has a private practice in the Tallahassee area. Today, I'm going to be doing a little something different. I'm going to be talking about a little bit of my experience of being a mental health person in the Florida Department of Corrections. I worked in FDOC for a little over 8 years. I absolutely loved what I did. I just got tired of the bullshit, which is why I left. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the difficulties of being a mental health person in corrections. One of the first things that I found one of the most difficult is that inmates in DOC and in the general public, people that commit crimes are generally not looked upon as being worthwhile human beings. And as a mental health professional and as a social worker, we believe that each person under the sun has dignity and worth as a human being. This can be a difficult thing to practice in corrections. It's difficult to talk about with the public who you work with. Some people out here in the free world, they believe working with people who have committed murders, committed sexual abuse, lie, cheat, steal, do drugs are not worth it. They're throwaway people. And even dealing with people in the public as a mental health person, it was difficult sometimes to explain why I felt the way that I did, why I wanted to do the work that I wanted to do. And that in itself was something that was a difficult part of working in corrections. Then on top of it, you also had the staff themselves, security staff, medical staff, classification staff, all different kinds of staff. You had a wide variety of thoughts and feelings about the people that we worked with. Some people, they felt very, very negatively about the inmate population. You had staff that would say things like, this is a waste of a person. This person doesn't deserve to live. This person is awful. Then you had other staff that they were very motivated and they wanted to help the inmate population. And sometimes with them, they would cross boundaries and they would cross lines and they would do things that they weren't supposed to do. And so then you had that aspect of the other side of the coin. So you had some people that they didn't want to see the humanity at all in the population that we served. And then we had the other side of that where you had staff that didn't want to lay down boundaries, felt sorry for the inmate population, felt sorry for inmates, and would allow them to do behaviors that were destructive to themselves simply because they felt bad for them. In particular, we would have female staff members that would allow gunning behaviors because they felt bad for the inmates, that these were male inmates that were locked up. We would also then have staff members that would bring in contraband in order to have cell phones, give cell phones to inmates, all that kind of stuff. You would have where you had some staff where they would just sit back and watch violence that other inmates perpetrated against other inmates. It didn't happen so much at my facility. I did work at Madison Correctional, and I honestly and thoroughly believe that most everybody that I worked with, we did have some dirty staff, but overwhelmingly, a lot of the problems that were at other facilities, like the excessive force, the violence against inmates, staff misconduct in that direction, were very small. So I was very, very fortunate to work with a very good security staff. But at the same time, there was still that mentality, and I understand where it comes from, because I had to see, I no longer do since I don't work in the correction system. we would have to see some of the worst things under the sun. We would also have to impose what could seem like arbitrary rules on people and arbitrary consequences. We would have to see immense suffering and be able to be okay with that. And so one of the coping mechanisms when we're doing that in order to be able to function as a human being and see that amount of suffering and still be okay is sometimes what we would have to do, not me in particular, but other people, what they would have to do is see inmates as an other group, a group that deserves their consequences, deserves the bad things that happen to them. And that is not the greatest coping mechanism. It's one that dehumanizes people, but it is a coping mechanism that helps people get through the violence that they have to see, the violence that they would sometimes have to participate in. So one of the biggest struggles of working in corrections is that sometimes it felt like it was stupid to care, that I was wasting my time in my career working with these individuals. And this was not only from staff and the public. We would also have inmates that judge other inmates for their crimes and for their behaviors. And so I would hear from other inmates, you're wasting your time with this one. That one is just a chomo. Why are you spending any time? So it was all across the board. So one of the biggest struggles, I think, as a mental health provider in the correctional system is that we're caring about extremely marginalized people. We're caring about people that a lot of people just want to throw away, that they feel like don't deserve to be part of society, don't deserve to have any compassion shown to them. And that was a very difficult place to be, especially since a lot of the counseling that I did, I would see an immense amount of suffering. I would see an immense amount of trauma. I would see just horrible, horrible, horrible things that they themselves had gone through. On the flip side, it would then become difficult as a mental health provider sometimes to have some empathy for some of the people due to the crimes that they have committed and the lack of remorse that they showed. So that could sometimes be a huge difficulty. I remember one case in particular where one of the job requirements was I had to do sex offender screenings. And I work pretty well with sex offenders. I'm a pretty non-judgmental person. My whole philosophy behind sex offenders is they have a problem. If we want to stop sex offending behavior before it even starts, we need to address people who are at risk for sex offending behavior. We need to be able to put programs in place and put different stop gaps so that way we can make sure that there are no victims. We can keep, as providers, counseling victims, or we can start working to address the problems that lead people to sexually offending behaviors. But anyway, that's off on another topic. So basically, I'm going back to a case where I had very little empathy, and working in this environment can sometimes bring that out. So one of them, I was doing a sex offender screening, and what came out of that person's mouth right there, oh, it was bad. And so right there, sometimes as a mental health professional, when we're reviewing and looking at crimes, and what's interesting is there's two departments that really knew inmates' crimes. That was the classification side and the mental health side. And in fact, in mental health, on pretty much every single piece of our documentation, we needed to write down what the crime was that they were currently incarcerated for, and we would also need to write down the sentence. No other departments were required to do that. And in fact, it was frowned upon that security look up charges because the belief was that it might impact the way that they treat that particular inmate. So that was something that sometimes could be a difficult part of working in corrections as a mental health professional. Very rarely did it impact me. Generally, I could really start to empathize with a lot of the things that happen and then be able to look at how those prior behaviors impacted ultimately the crime. And this was in terms of drug crimes, property crimes, sex crimes, and violence against other people. So it was an interesting thing to be working in corrections and to be dealing with this belief that the people that we put in prison are somehow not worthy of basic human dignity and basic human caring, and the belief that people can get better and they want to do better. So I figured I would do a few of these different topics about the struggles of working in corrections as a mental health professional. And so that's my first one. The first topic of being able to recognize that when you're working in corrections as a mental health person, the stigma attached to it, not just from the prison system itself, from security staff, classification staff, even medical staff. Some of the medical staff that I've encountered, they should never be allowed to work with anybody, ever. Their lack of empathy, their lack of caring, it just astounds me. I have no idea why they're in medical care at all, but whatever. So you would have those sorts of issues even from inside the prison, but then even outside the prison, stating that I was a mental health provider in the Department of Corrections. I would just have people that would sit there and say negative things about the people that I worked with and the career choice that I made in who I worked with. So that's the struggle for people that work or decide to work in corrections and do mental health care. I hope you found this video to give you some insight about one part of working in the correctional system. Often I see a lot of videos, readings, information about working in corrections from the security side of it, even from the medical side of it, but I very rarely see any from the mental health side of it, what it's like to be a mental health provider in the correctional system. Like I said, I hope you found this video to be educational. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. As always, if you found this to be interesting, if you find the topics to be helpful, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel and share the message, share the information to others that might find it helpful. Take care.